sorry.
Since its introduction in October 2001, the meteoric rise of the iPod has been nothing short of phenomenal. It's gone from merely an idea to over 70 million sold worldwide.
It's nice that other people are noticing.
But even more staggering is the story of how it got there, from Steve Jobs' inspired return to the company he founded.
Thank you very much.
The birth of an idea.
Music was the perfect synthesis for Apple. Steve understood that music was part of our DNA.
And its nerve-wracking development.
For the 8 months of development on the iPod, it was extremely tense.
There it is, right there.
To one simple stroke of luck that helped turn the iPod from a tech gadget into a cultural icon.
No company had ever cared before about the color of the darn earbuds. But all of a sudden, that became a symbol, and people are like, what is that?
Plus, we'll reveal how Steve Jobs shook up the record industry and turned his computer company into a music powerhouse.
If 5 years ago I said, 5 years from now the fifth largest music distributor is going to be Apple, you would probably have suggested I go lie down for a while.
This is the inside story of the iPod. Believe it or not, the iPod started with a smile. That's right, a smile. That's Steve Jobs smiling on December 20th, 1996.
Thank you very much.
The day it was announced he would be returning home to Apple, more than 11 years after being banished from the company he founded.
It's a wonderful Shakespearean story. I mean, it really is. Steve had left Apple in 1985 because of a coup that he tried to foment against John Sculley. John Sculley had been handpicked by Steve to run Apple, and then the two men came to loggerheads. The company had spent years not knowing what to do. Under John Sculley, it had floundered around, tried to continue to build Macs, not gone anywhere.
When Steve Jobs came back to Apple, Apple had been losing $1 billion a year. Its stock had fallen from about $60 a share to $17 a share. To a lot of people in the industry, a lot of very smart people, it really looked like Apple was in a death spiral.
The brand was limping. The products were terrible. They were uncompetitive. Some of the strongest loyalists of the Apple brand were beginning to defect to Microsoft. It was a terrible, terrible state. In fact, the board was thinking of selling Apple and closing shop. Perfect. When Steve Jobs returned, it was like the return of the Messiah.
And when Steve returned, he knew he had to make some changes. Quickly, Steve slashes Apple's overgrown product line, eliminating products like the Newton, Apple's foray into the PDA market.
Okay, when Steve got back to Apple, the first thing he did was can the Newton. The Newton had been a handheld machine built by Sculley, early days with handwriting recognition. It was sort of cool in some ways, but it didn't have Steve's imprint on it. It had John Sculley's imprint. He wasn't about to go put a lot of money behind that.
Then Steve reduces the research and development projects from 50 to just 10.
When he got back to Apple, he took a look at all the products that Apple had and essentially called in the engineers, and to each one of them said, take a look at this. What's wrong with this product? And so everyone sort of hummed and hawed. And Steve said, well, I'll tell you what's wrong. They're crap.
When Steve Jobs came back to Apple, he had a bit of a reign of terror where he would meet people on campus and he would say, who are you? What do you do? So stories went around about Steve Jobs bumping into people he didn't know on elevators in campus. And by the time the elevators were open, the people were fired.
Steve wasn't looking to create a particular product. It wasn't this big plan to do this one thing. What it was to create a milieu, create an environment where the right thing will pop into your head and you'll just be hit with it like a thunderbolt. Steve has said many times, and I think he's right about this, you can't ask somebody what they want next. They don't know. They can't tell you what they're going to want next. They just know when they see it that it's going to be the right thing.
He had to change the way the outside world viewed Apple, the way customers viewed Apple, and the way that people who worked at Apple thought about the place. So Jobs did the now famous Think Different advertising campaign. It wasn't just an ad campaign. before, everyone looked at Apple and said, here's a company that has a tiny percentage of the market. They're losers. They're on the margins. And that this is a bad thing to be. And Jobs comes in and he reframes the notion. And he says, no, it's good to be in the 1 or 2% of people who are original thinkers, who are mavericks, who are innovators.
Steve's message sinks in. A year later, in May 1998, Apple releases a product that reflects Steve's new energizing spirit called the iMac.
Despite a loyal following, the obituary notices began to appear, but guess what? Mac is back.
The colorful all-in-one computer syncs perfectly with the new digital lifestyle, sending email and surfing the web. In the first 45 days on sale, Apple sells nearly 300,000 iMacs, an impressive debut.
They looked so good, you kind of want to lick them.
I think the launch of the iMac was really important in setting the groundwork for the coming of the iPod, because the iMac was the first kind of new computer to hit a home run with youth culture. And so when all other computer products were boring and gray, he gave them basically a cool fashion computer product, and they'd never seen anything like that before.
While the iMac was a step in the right direction for Apple, the real catalyst for the iPod would come from somewhere else. Enter Northeastern University freshman Sean Fanning.
Sean Fanning was a freshman at Northeastern University in Boston in 1998, and he had a roommate who, like many people, liked listening to MP3s. But the roommate complained to him that he could never find them. There'd be a list of links on mp3.com or some other site, and then he'd click through, and the link would be gone. It would be dead. He couldn't hear the music.
Here's this young college kid, and he has a very basic need. He wants to share music with his friends. It's pretty basic. And there was no service out there giving him what he wanted. So he just created it.
Within months, Sean releases a revolutionary piece of software that allows users to share MP3 files across the internet for free. He names the program after his own online nickname, Napster.
When Sean released it, it was really released to his friends, and then his friends gave it to his friends, and then their friends. It went from 50 people to 1,000, and then the next week it was at 2,000, and then it started to grow logarithmically. So I think by the end of a month, we were already pushing 10,000 users.
Within a year, Napster has grown from Sean's dorm room to more than 60 million users worldwide, making it the fastest growing company in history and public enemy #1 of the recording industry.
The record industry was absolutely terrified of Napster. They'd been tracking it for months before they sued. There was a meeting where all the heads of the record industry were together with Hillary Rosen, and she said, let's do a little demonstration.
I had a number of the record label heads in the room. These were the ultimate music men and women of the industry. And we literally sat there for 45 minutes while they threw out names of obscure songs and hit songs and everything they could think of, literally playing sort of Find That Tune, and every single thing they named was available from somewhere on Napster. And those guys just walked out of the room blown away.
A federal court judge granted a temporary injunction against Napster, pending a trial on charges by the recording industry that Napster violates copyright laws by stealing artists' songs.
And while the record companies scramble to shut Napster down, one thing becomes very clear. The digital music revolution has begun. Back at Apple, Steve Jobs sees an opportunity.
Once it dawned on Steve and his executives that this thing was happening on the internet with music, they knew that they had been missing an opportunity. They did photos, movies, and it was really not until a second iteration of the iMac that the iMac became something that you could burn CDs on and use music on.
Steve knew that Napster was a giant success. He knew that this was happening. Steve was looking for some way to manage songs, to manage music. He wanted Apple users to have a product that enabled you to take your CDs, put them into a Mac, rip the song, and play them back.